And we're a small company, so we're not paying what a Google or an AWS is paying, right? But we're attracting great talent, and that great talent usually comes with delivers the great customer experience, and the better people you have here, the better you're going to do serving those customers. So that's been one really important thing. It's the attitude that these employees have when a customer walks in, right? They're clean, they're organized, these guys are there to service you. It's all about that attitude and kind of pushing it down and making them realize what the purpose of their work is.
Welcome to the Mindfulness Experience Podcast. My name is Keith Fifeson. On this podcast, I had the pleasure of getting to know even better Mr. J.P. Laquer. He's the Senior Vice President at Databank, a company that helps people understand data. He was recently on the Mindfulness Experience Podcast where we talked about his role at Databank, but we talked about a lot more. JP is responsible for developing new ideas and ensuring that they work well. This includes overseeing how the company does things and making sure customers are happy and employees are happy, which kind of equals the same thing. People have called him an innovative thinker. I think that's really not enough. He comes up with these new ideas easily, and he's really good at mobilizing teams to work together to come up with solutions that are cost-effective and provide positive benefits for the people and the organizations that he works with. I was delighted to hear his ideas. His enthusiasm is contagious. I believe you too will be impacted by his methodologies. Please welcome Mr. J.P. Laquer. Hey, I am here with J.P. Laquer. J.P., welcome to the Mindfulness Experience. How are you, man? What's going on?
I'm great, Keith. What is up with you? You look great. Good to hear your voice.
Well, it's good to be with you. And I know you for quite a long time. I've been a part of your life journey, and have certainly seen your corporate journey. And you're a guy with a lot of positivity, a lot of energy, and a lot of vision. And right now you're working over at Databank.
Correct.
Tell me, can you describe, what does Databank do? And, we're talking about the mindfulness experience, but this is more around the customer experience, this show. So what does Databank do, and how do you really help organizations be more mindful in their customer experience? There you go.
Interesting. Okay. So we're a data center company. Databank is headquartered down in Dallas. I'm the Senior VP of Marketing. I also drive a lot of our cultural initiatives. So I'm close to the customer experience in terms of how the culture impacts that. And I come here after a long period of consulting on my own, as you know, around sort of the intersection of brand and culture. So that was always my expertise in my professional journey. And so as a data center company, we operate facilities around the country, about 65 of them, that are large buildings that provide air conditioning, cooling, security, network, and power for companies to come in and put their IT workloads in there.
Now that sounds kind of boring. That sounds kind of boring in some way, doesn't it? I mean, but it's not. It's like saying that your heart is a little boring, right? I mean, because this is at the heart of every operation.
Your nervous system. Yeah. I mean, data centers, literally every interaction you have today with a digital device, whether it's, this call that we're on, it's something you do with your computer, reaching out to the internet, online banking, picking up your phone, making every one of those transactions at some point is passing through a data center somewhere. And there are, literally thousands of them, around the world. They are the lifeblood of the internet, just like the network business, where we started our careers. It's behind the scenes. You don't see it necessarily, but if it's not there, it, especially today, because our lives are so digital.
So when we start taking a look at data centers, I mean, a lot of people might be familiar with AWS, Amazon, and their platform and their cloud platform. Your platform's similar to that in some respect, right?
Yeah, and they're actually in customers in some cases. So our buildings are they're multi-tenant data centers, so they have a lot of different customers in them. They could be enterprises that are doing software as a service, banking, you name it, but also maybe a cloud service provider like an AWS who needs a place to put all those computers, right? Sometimes they build their own data centers, sometimes they outsource to providers like Databank. And so we kind of cater to all different types. And we also have our own cloud platform. So in addition to coming in and just putting your own equipment in our space, we actually have a bare metal and a typical cloud platform where you can rent space on existing computers as well, though that's a relatively small part of the business.
So when we start talking about customer experience and the customer journey, I mean, for a lot of folks listening on this, they may think, well, come on, you've got a data center, you've got computers there, what kind of customer journey is there? And, why are we talking about customer experience in this particular case? Can you talk to that in some respect? Because I know you've got some really good ideas, and we start talking about archetypes and stuff like that. So I'm
So at the end of the day, we are hosting for these companies really, really important workloads. Sometimes it is their entire business. If you're an online business, if you are doing software as a service or something, those applications, those servers, that software, that's running in these data centers, and it can't go down. So, the first thing we got in touch with when I got here was kind of the purpose around the company. And I had developed my own sort of alternative to mission, vision, and values that I called purpose, way, and impact. And it was sort of 3 stages of a rocket. It was an easier way to tell a story for people to remember kind of what we're all about. And the first stage of that rocket's the most important one. It's and it doesn't have to be sexy and cool. It's just, why are we here? What's the thing that we simply can't accept, that exists in the world, and we want to change it, right? We can't stand it. And that's that people shouldn't have to worry about that underlying infrastructure. These companies need to be able to run those applications and use them to change everybody's lives for the better. And they shouldn't have to worry about the underlying infrastructure. And so, our purpose is to take that worry away. So that's really important to their customer experience, right? They're turning over some really important infrastructure to run in somebody else's facility. They need to know it's there. And so not only technically do you have to be able to run that well, but you got to give them really solid peace of mind that the
now,
team
do you do this a session, this evaluation with the senior executive team? How does that work, where you get everybody on board as you start going? And what were those 3 stages of the rocket again?
The purpose, the way, and the impact. So your purpose is sort of the first stage of the rocket. It's like, why do we exist, right? Why did we start the business in the first place? Well, people shouldn't have to worry about their IT infrastructure, right? That's the most, and it's visceral. It's very simple.
Got it.
Your way is going to be, how do you go about pursuing that purpose in a way that's different from other companies in the same business, right? Because let's face it, this is, at the end of the day, a business about building buildings that host computers. Like, other people can build the exact same things with the same technology. How are you going to do it differently? That's where the culture comes in, right? And the values, and sort of maybe some of the technical things that some of the technical ways you do it. And then the third stage of that rocket is the impact. And instead of like a vision statement where, a lot of companies will say, well, we want to be the best company about blah, blah, blah. And it's, about you. This is about getting into orbit. You've achieved your purpose. You're looking down at the rest of the world, and how have you impacted everybody else's lives? So if we can achieve our purpose, that they don't have to worry about this infrastructure, they're able to build incredible applications, do things that, literally change lives and make the world a better place. And, we saw it during the pandemic when we were donating capacity to companies who were doing supercomputing platforms to identify how we're gonna solve COVID, right? These are the things that these companies can do, or customers can do, when they don't have to worry about keeping the lights on in this infrastructure. They can just go grow this stuff. And
got it. So the why, the way, the impact, the purpose, the difference, and how are you really impacting lives? So you brought this into the organization, and how's it been doing since you got on board?
So it's great. I mean, we've grown tremendously. The company's gone from about 200 people to about 800 people since I got here in 2019. So it's grown very fast. Some of that's been acquisition. A lot of it's been organic. But culturally, we've really built something I think that's special. And everybody here knows what the purpose is. But we've also tried to build a little bit of a system, an operating system around culture. And culture is one of those things that it's an intangible, right? And so you need to, when you have a large number of people, that you need to have understand and if you want to be intentional about building a culture, you need to have context. And so the way we did that was by turning to an archetypal system
Right. Now this is of great interest, because as we start to know the monomyth, the Joseph Campbell myth, I use that in my work a lot, is really understanding the hero's journey. And, along that journey, there are different archetypes and there are different ways of looking at individuals, personas, if you will. So tell us a little bit more about what happened with that.
So Culture Talk was the first survey instrument that was designed around measuring the presence of archetypes within a culture. So collectively within a group of people. And we're the theory behind it is that we're very Carl Jung believed that these characters, if you will, were almost genetically imprinted on us from tens of thousands of years of storytelling, right? And we see them in advertising and in media, as you mentioned. So this instrument identifies around the presence of 12 different archetypes. We've done the survey a couple of different times. We also there's an individual version of it, so individuals can do it to recognize their own archetypes. But what it did is it gave us a common language, so we could talk about, everybody in the company could talk about archetypes in the same way. And what's really interesting about them is when you see the archetypes that rise to the top, because there's always a couple that are stronger, and you know what the behaviors are of those archetypes. Now everybody can kind of see them, and they become a lot more visible, and you can have a common language to talk about them. And archetypes also have strengths and shadows. And so most of the value is understanding what the shadows are. As an example, we're an organization that's very dominated by heroes. We like to take on, and heroes want to win, and they want to come to the rescue, and they run towards the danger, right? If you think about the Marine Corps advertisements, everybody's running away, but they're running towards the danger. Doctors Without Borders is another great brand, people going in the hardest situations. We kind of see that in the customers that we get, people who have incredibly complex, compliant, heavily compliant workloads. They need to put it in a place where it's going to be absolutely secure and safe. Sometimes they've had a problem. They've, something's been compromised. They've had some hacking, whatever. They've had infrastructure that failed. So we kind of rally the wagons, and we'll do whatever it takes to win these really complicated deals. Heroes, when they don't win, can also, when there isn't victory, they can turn inward and they can become bullying. There can be politics. There can be backstabbing, right? So that needs to be balanced. You can be on
that's the shadow. That's the shadow
side, right? And so once you know what these shadows are to these archetypes, you can start to look for them and you can manage them. And so what we've been able to do is not only do this across the organization, and in our case, that's also these energies balance each other. So the hero is really balanced by the caregiver. The caregiver is the second strongest one in our organization. It's all about serving the customer. So that energy, that aggressiveness of the hero is now balanced by it's always in behalf of the customer. Keep that in mind. And we also have a really strong every person, or every man, sometimes it's known as. And that's a very, everybody rolls up their sleeves. Everybody contributes. There's not a lot of ego here. There's not a lot of layers to the organization. It's very democratic. And we always have each other's backs. And so those energies, and then we also have a sage, which is the fourth one, and it's very disciplined and process oriented and data driven and accountable, transparent, right? And when you think about it, for a company whose job is to take on and take the worry out of managing these mission critical infrastructures, that's what you want. Somebody who's going to come to the rescue, do what it takes on behalf of the customer, has each other's backs, and has real precision kind of.
That's beautiful. I love that. It's absolutely beautiful.
Yeah. And those are the four that are dominant in our.
So it's not just about it's not just about buildings and computers. It's a lot more, because underneath all that, and we talked about AI a little earlier, but underneath all that is a human being with a heart. And at the heart of it, you've actually gone in, taken a look at the heart, and look to go ahead and define it or connect it with the head, so that you really understand how people are ticking, how your organization's ticking, and how to go ahead and apply that in the real world.
Yeah,
beautiful.
Absolutely. And we're now taking that framework and we're driving it down into individual teams. I was in the city yesterday with the leadership of our data center ops teams, and each of them in regions want to now take that survey and do it with their teams, so that their teams have their individual archetypes and they understand how they fit into the larger organization. And it really helps when you're having difficult conversations, when you're trying to get people to work together. Invariably, you have conflict, and people will jump to conclusions and start going to the stories that they form in their heads. And
is there a measurement system that you're using to go ahead and get to this? Because you're saying obviously there's an assessment that they take. Is this your assessment, or is this
no? It's the Culture Talk. It's the Culture Talk assessment. Yeah. So Culture Talk has two different surveys. One is an organization-wide survey, and the other one is an individual survey.
Got
one
it.
measures
Okay.
your
So
personal
you're using that
archetypes.
platform. Got it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so
Beautiful.
we're using that, and again, it comes with a lot of different tools and cheat sheets like, hey, how do two archetypes have? Where do they get along? Where do they typically have conflict? How do you stop? And this is where I think all this stuff comes back to mindfulness. Is that so much of business is about people and relationships. Even when you're in a business like ours, it's about computers and buildings. At the end of the day, it's about people. And we all tell stories in our head. We all have our individual archetypes, but most of the time we're not aware of that. And one of the best things I learned in coaching is you got to meet people where they're at, right? And a lot of the assessments that are out there are there's a ton of great different kinds of assessment, DISC, you name it. But this one's really simple because everybody understands archetypes, and it's kind of like a great introduction to this whole idea of mindfulness, right? I have people who are in roles that you would never think would embrace this kind of stuff. In fact, most of them are not. They come here and they go, "What is this culture stuff? I don't believe in this. Like, go ahead, just tell me what I got to do for my job.
Just give me meat and potatoes." That's it.
And then they go through this and they're like, "Oh wow, I never realized. Yeah, I could have told you I was a hero, but I didn't know about these shadow sides, and now I see it." And it's like the first step to opening their minds to be like, you got to meet them where they're at. Like, oh, this is easy. I get it. It's not too complicated. It's not too theoretical. They can grasp it, and then all of a sudden, they're on the path to now pausing, assuming some positive intent before they react to something, and it opens the door and creates that possibility. So we started with what we thought was a really simple way to introduce the organization and everybody to what culture means, to a common language, to a set of characters that everybody could relate to and understand. And it's been fabulous.
Well, I think that's wonderful because what you're doing is you're giving them an opportunity to really understand all the floors in the building, if you will, from an analogy, and you're giving them the elevator to get up to the top. The real question that I mean, if we look at it from the viewpoint of people being at the heart of the operation, then the real question is how do they show up as their best self? So I think this area of mindfulness is very important. We use it to help people to not only recognize when they've got the shadow there, but to also help to self-regulate and come back to a point where they're able to go ahead and put the genie back in the box or put the genie back in the bottle, right?
But it all starts with awareness. You got to be aware of it first.
It all starts with awareness, and it all starts with the individual making some changes. So when you start to take a look at your operation and how effective your programs are, what kinds of things do you use to measure effectiveness in terms of the strategies that you're putting in place in the organization? And maybe, how does that relate to the customer? Are you using the traditional strategies like CSAT and, customer survey measurements, or what does that look like?
Yeah, so we're doing NPS for customers.
Net Promoter Score.
Net Promoter Score. And then we also do an ENPS internally. And then we have a survey. We do a deeper survey, kind of a brand culture health check survey, we call it, twice a year, which is a more extensive one. The approach we took, my belief coming in was that, when culture requires three things. You have to understand it first. So that became the archetype platform, right? Go in, make sure you run everybody through a process. They're all on the same page. They all feel bought in, and you reveal what are the archetypes that are at the heart of the culture. The next thing you need to do is you need to develop some messaging around that, right? And so that is a set of values and some messages, and we keep it pretty simple. There's 7 of them in total that make up the Databank way, we call it. They're all tied to the archetypes. So one of them is, inspiring confidence. That's the hero. Another one is being data centered. That's the, play on the business. Right? That's the sage, right? And so everybody kind of recognizes it. So you got that messaging layer. And then a lot of companies stop there. But the third part, you got to operationalize it. And so what we chose to do was to put in place an online hub. And we did this initially right at the beginning of the pandemic. So right after everybody went into lockdown. And I mean, it was transformative for the organization. It created this kind of digital hub where everybody could go internally, not only learn about this culture, but we created a whole recognition system around these 7 values. So any employee can send anybody else an e-card effectively against one of these 7 values. So, and every day you can go into what we call the vault, this Databank, was the name of the company. We called the online hub the Vault. It's where we keep our culture secure.
Yeah. Very good.
Right. And, a little backstory, Databank's headquarters in Dallas is in the Federal Reserve Building, the former Federal Reserve Building downtown, which has a vault in the basement.
That's wonderful,
Yeah, where they supposedly held Lee Harvey Oswald for a period of time in between when they were moving him around, but I don't know if that's true. But so on the vault, you can go in there every day, and every employee has access to it, and you can send a kudos or an e-card to any other employee, and it can be, hey, thanks for inspiring confidence, and every one of them has a little story. And so this now became every one of you'll see dozens of them in there every day. They're examples. How is somebody actually living out the Databank way or doing things in a Databank way? What are examples of somebody inspiring confidence or being data centered or putting people first? That's your caregiver and your every person, right? We have these values, and they're simple, and they're assuming positive intent, right? They're all about just triggers to remind people how to behave and to be a little bit more mindful and to recognize each other. And so we see, and of course, obviously we have all the reporting on that. So we can see the recognition. And I mean, it exploded when we first rolled this thing out. And, we probably do like 500 a month now. I mean, it's just like every day there's like a few dozen recognitions going on. So we can measure that. We also do NPS. So we get feedback through that, and we see how employees are feeling. And then, there's obviously the anecdotal stuff, how quickly, and there's other things we measure, like, how quick open recs, how quickly we're able to hire people. And then there's just a lot of the, the things that you see when you're out there. And as I was sharing with you earlier, I just came back from our sales kickoff, and like the energy, and you hear it from these, partners who were there, who came and sponsored, different vendors who sponsored our sales kickoff. And they were like, wow, we go to a lot of, sales kickoffs for the companies, and we sponsor a lot of them, and they don't feel like this, and just these incredible, you get the sense that it has an effect.
Well, it sounds like it's working. I mean, you've gone from 200 to 800 employees,
800 people, and we're spread out across
3 years, in the last 3 years,
in the last 3 years, and we're spread out across 30 markets. So you're not talking about 800 people all in one location. When Zappos, one of the people who works for me came from Zappos, recruited her from there, and she had, she said we had 800,000 people, but they were basically in 2 locations, Las Vegas and somewhere else. So you could create that, a real vibrant culture because everybody's in one location, or the bulk of people. We're spread out across 30 locations. So and a lot of people are still working remote. So that was the other benefit of having the Vault, this online hub, was that we were able to build kind of this digital town square where people could come and interact and connect with each other and learn who each other was. And then we also did some other things very early on in the pandemic, which we've carried on. One of them was a company-wide game show called Keymaster. So there's a theme here, right? Wow. Databank, the Vault, Keymaster.
I love it.
And this thing was an incredible story. Yeah. So is
that like from Ghostbusters?
Yeah, basically, right. Yeah. Who's got the key to the vault? Kind of like, right. Yeah. So right after we went into lockdown, we had rolled out sort of this initial archetypes and messaging, and I had stood up an ambassador group of people around the company who were going to be kind of like cultural ambassadors. And when we went into lockdown, I organized a call, and I said, hey, what are you guys doing to kind of keep teams? What are you seeing people do to keep teams together? And one of them was the service delivery team, and they were doing every Friday at like 4:00, jumping on, and one guy was leading like a trivia, kind of a thing. He would put together some trivia questions, and they would it was like, on chat, on Zoom, put select your answers in. And it was just for fun. He goes, I could show people and give them the materials, and they could do that with their own teams. And I thought to myself, I'm like, what if we did this as a company-wide game show once a week? And he's like, I love it. And he's a really great, energetic guy, great personality. So we, in a month, pulled this thing together, and every Thursday we would do this at 5:00, and everyone in the company would get on Zoom to watch 4 or 5 contestants go through this. And it was like Databank trivia, it was like industry trivia, it was like movie trivia, and then there was a winner. And then we did that, and there was a whole playoff, and then a championship round. And now we do it every year at the holiday. We do like a Keymaster holiday episode.
Oh, that's great.
But they were fantastic. We recorded every one of them, put it up as a Vault post on the, as a blog post on the Vault, and people could, if they missed it, they could go watch it. And it was like this incredible company-wide event when everyone was at home, but we were all together. And so I think that's the benefit of kind of knowing who you are, and you learned about everybody else in the company, and obviously you got people got profiled. We've continued to do stuff like that because it helps as you grow and you get bigger.
So if we start taking a look at the archetype work, right? Understanding the whole area of this cultural assessment. You went from the why, the way, the impact. You went ahead, you started to take a look at the culture itself. You created this cultural assessment. And then, in terms of the messaging, you reinforce that with the understanding of the culture, the messaging around that. What does that look like? And then you had this recognition system. I just want to get that back to that for a moment. Is this your own homegrown system where you were able to create these cards and do these kinds of things, or is that something that you white labeled, or what does that look like?
We white labeled a platform called Reward Gateway. So it's a company that's in the UK and the US. And it had been a tool that I had been looking at as a consultant for a number of years and wanted to always implement. I thought it was a great way to bring to life or operationalize. I call it operationalizing the culture. Right. And hadn't had a chance to do it, but when I got here full time, I said, I'm going to do this. So we had begun that the planning for that in like February of 2020, and then we went into lockdown. We continued the planning. We rolled it out in July of that year.
Right. Well, I mean, and that sounds wonderful because then you've got this real-time system that is giving individuals feedback internally based on their performance and what they're doing, and then you went even further to go ahead and you created this game show. You created this culture around it. You've got people, you had this event, there was a real vibe there, everything was happening. So my question around all of this is when you start taking a look at, how this improves the customer or the employee. I mean, I can see how it improves the employee experience. I'm wondering if there are some like real world examples of how this really impacted, let's say, your NPS scores, or let's say your overall growth, customer growth, or, whatever the feedback mechanism might be that might be a little bit more tangible. Do you have any success stories that you can share?
So, I think, so obviously there's a lot of data around, the employee experience, right? And we see that, right? Recognition's going up, the positive scores, on the surveys and that kind of stuff. At the customer level, I think where you see it translate is, I think it's two things. One, we're recruiting great people. Like we're attracting, and we're retaining people. And especially in the last year when there's been a lot of, turnover in the organization, we've had some too, but we've really held on to great people, and we've attracted more great people as a result of it. And, and we're a small company, so we're not paying what, a Google or an AWS is paying, right? But we're attracting great talent, and that great talent usually comes with, delivers the great customer experience, and the better people you have here, the better you're going to do serving those customers. So that's been one really important thing. And the other thing is that, when it's the attitude that these employees have when a customer walks in, right? So, we're doing whatever it takes to win these deals, and then we're getting them installed on time. We're creating a great experience when these customers come in. The data centers are, they're clean, they're organized, these guys are there to service you. It's all about that attitude and kind of pushing it down and making them realize what the purpose of their work is. And, so I think now how do you measure that stuff? I haven't figured that out yet, but, I think we're at the very beginning of this journey, but, you see it in the feedback you get from customers, on those NPS scores. I notice it when I go into the data center and you see this thing, these are guys, who are running a data center that oftentimes it's an entry level job. It can be very mechanical. They're there to watch the security system, make sure, certainly at that entry level, and they're bringing a maturity and an attitude to it that I think, and a smile and a willingness to serve the customer that, you might not necessarily get at another data center. And we have, customers have said that. So they've given us
I had someone on the show recently, and they were talking about friction and resolution and friction. And you might have a sense in terms of that whole conversation. Right. But from that viewpoint, what is your a lot of people measure FCR, first call resolution. A lot of people look at escalations, as one of your guidelines. What does that look like, within your organization?
I haven't tied it to that, but we have that data, and that's all in the support group. And the number of tickets. I mean, the ticket ratings, and I see those ticket ratings and the customer NPS are really high. And I don't remember what the numbers are offhand, but they resolve a lot of them on that first pass. So there's probably data I could dig into there. I haven't done that yet. I haven't taken it that far. But that's probably the next step.
Well, there you go. That's one of the reasons why you're here.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, I think, yeah. And like I said, right, we're still early in the journey on this. A lot of it has been, we've also grown so fast that a lot of the focus has been like, let's continue to just make sure we're doing the right thing for the customers for that, or for the employees, because if I take care of the employees, I've always believed if you take care of the employees, you will by definition take care of the business and the customers, right?
Right. I totally believe that. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
And
part of the organization.
And how do I let me measure first, then I'm taking care of the employees. And then I think the next step in this journey is how do I see and measure where it's impacting the other parts of the business?
Beautiful.
But I would say, we're not there yet, and there's a lot more to do. And this is continuous work. I think when I'm being a consultant for 15 years doing this and then coming in and doing it yourself, is a different experience, and it's been great because it's
very, very, very exciting, and I love this Y-Way impact, the cultural assessment, the journey that you brought the organization on, and I'm wondering, because we were talking a little earlier before we started to get on the podcast, I was wondering specifically around artificial intelligence, and it's like everywhere, ChatGPT, about the whole idea of, and you and we knew each other back in the outsourcing days when people were going to other countries. They're still doing that, but to a large extent, the new outsource area, whether or not it's for the gig economy or whether or not it's in organizations to really help individuals be more efficient and effective, is the use of AI. Where do you see that playing in your organization, if at all, or in the space, if you will, as we start to go forward?
Absolutely. Well, for one thing, it's going to be a huge driver of demand for data center capacity. There's estimates that every query on ChatGPT takes it's 7 times or 8 times as expensive because of the cost of the compute power, as well as the power to run those machines, and then the cooling, right? So these and so the density that it requires for these neural networks to do both the first step of learning. All these AI programs, they have to do the learning process first. It's very compute intensive, takes months or years, and then there's the inquiry, right, of people actually submitting inquiries. Just requires a tremendous amount of compute, very dense, very high capacity computers that generate a lot of heat. They need to be powered, they need to be cooled in these data centers. So, and they need space. And so it is, and right now the data center industry, is under high demand, and you need land, and it takes a long time to build a data center. These are 2-3 year projects, and they fill up very quickly, and you got to have power, and you want green power, right? More sustainable power. And you have supply chain issues of getting these things built, right? It's like everything else. So it's already under high demand, and it's going to increase a lot more. And so that's, in the business world for us, I think it's a good thing. It's going to be a big driver of demand over the next 10 years.
Right. So you still need the property, plant, and equipment in order to operate it, regardless of how smart it is. And and you need people that understand the technology.
Exactly. You need people that can understand it, know how to cool it. And there's all sorts of technology emerging. There's water chip based cooling stuff now that's going on. So it's not just about air conditioning. It's incredible the stuff that's going on there. So that's exciting. But on an internal basis, we look at it, and I like a lot of people, my background is kind of as a writer, a marketer, a messaging guy, right? And I was like, oh wow, and we have a bunch of outsourced writers we work with, and their first thought when they looked at it was, oh, our jobs are gone. And I kind of looked at it, and I've been playing with it for the last couple of weeks, and I said, you know what? I actually think it's a force multiplier. This is when, as a writer, somebody who's written a lot, I tend to spend 80% of my time on, I got to get the factual thing that research, I'm, blog post or whatever. Yeah, the research, I got to get that right. And maybe I'm spending 20% of my time, creating the voice and the tone that is on brand, right, for that company. I think this flips it around. And I think writing becomes a much more creative exercise in that now the nuts and bolts of the research of getting the basic outline of an argument together, you don't have to do. You still got to validate some of this stuff. But I have gone in and said, Chat GPT, give me a blog post about, how high performance compute can be supported by co-location data centers with blah, 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 and it spits back, the perfect outline, which then a writer could take and say, okay, I want to now sit down with all the subject matter experts at Databank. Let me go to the colo ops guy. Let me go to the guy who's in charge of mechanical stuff. Let me go to the network guy and fill out, how are we doing it specifically? What's our approach? You know what I mean? And so all of a sudden it becomes what would have taken you 2 weeks, you could probably get done in 2 days. And I think that's how
and what might have taken 5 people really only requires 1 or 2.
Possibly, yeah. But I mean, we only have 2 outsourced writers anyway, so it's not. I'm not necessarily taking that work away from anybody. It's just those guys are able to produce that much more. I also think there's some downside to it, right? I read an article somewhere that it's driving the cost of a buddy of mine on LinkedIn, actually, Peter Laquer wrote, it's driving the cost of bullshit to zero. So you're going to be inundated with crap of just like anybody can write anything. And so his optimistic take on it was we will become much more discriminating consumers of content. We are going to have to decide, and it will generate more need for more human to human contact because we're not going to believe as much of what we read. So, who knows where this stuff plays out. I tend to be an optimist. I'm an innocent. That's my archetype, my lead archetype. So I always see the glass as half full. And I think this is something that we have to manage, as humanity, but that it'll like the internet itself, it brought good and it brought bad, and we have to manage our way through it. So that's beautiful. So I think that what you're doing is you're painting a picture. There was some of what you started to talk about in terms of, property, plant, and equipment. I started to think, suddenly I fell into the matrix, I was like, oh my God, the computers are taking over. We will become the batteries. The computers will go ahead and run the programs. Oh no, but I don't think that's happening. No, there's so much.
Not anytime soon. Yeah.
You need robots, or truly need robots who have, capable of doing what we can do, but there's a lot of hands-on in the background to make this stuff work,
That's me with the psychedelics kicking in.
We're not there yet. Maybe 100 years
we're not there yet. So so it sounds to me, I'm looking at the time. I know that we've spent some really good time chatting here. It sounds to me like you've really found a place where you can help them find their soft side, because for the most part, the property, plant, and equipment is not all that human. It doesn't necessarily always have a heart. And I think it sounds to me like what you've done, and certainly through the multiplier effect, you've helped grow this business substantially, and you've created the heart and the culture and the feeling tone throughout the culture that really helps individuals vibe. And now you're looking at, okay, how do we continue to not only build that, but translate that back into customer growth and customer satisfaction?
Extend it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's a fair summary.
That's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing. So JP, how do people get a hold of you? Maybe find out a little bit more about, this rocket ship of yours, and or
Impact,
and or maybe tap into some of your knowledge, expertise, and enthusiasm.
Sure, absolutely. So they can contact me at Databank or on LinkedIn. My email address is jlaqueur, JLAQUEUR @databank.com. And I think I still have purposewaimpact.com set up, which points to my old consulting site.
Cool.
And they can at brandfoundations.us, and they can get some information there. But always, I love to share sort of the journey that we've been on, and how we've done this. I don't think there's a lot of companies that have kind of brought all the pieces together to both understand message and operationalize a culture like we have. And so, and using the tools that are out there, and I feel like we have a really good playbook of how to do this, and I'm excited to continue developing that here at Databank.
Well, it's exciting. It's exciting to see how you've brought the tone of mindfulness and experience into the organization, and really help the organization breathe a lot more clearly. So,
and made it accessible. I think. Made it really accessible for people, which is the key.
Yeah, which is fun. I really want to thank you, my friend, for being here.
Thank you
for sharing your knowledge, your wisdom with us, and we'll see you. We'll see you again soon, I'm sure.
You bet. All right. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Mindfulness Experience Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and leave us a review. We have other exciting guests coming up in the next few weeks, so stay tuned. For more mindfulness tips and tricks, visit our website at workmindfulness.com. Thanks again for being a part of the Mindfulness Experience. This is Keith Fivesen.